You're listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com and sound off. And now it's time to drop some knowledge.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast, presented as always by Mile High Huddle and powered by Overtime Media. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, and with me as always is my partner in crime. You know him, you love him as the lead NFL writer for Heavy.com. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, we can talk about that snooze fest, and we will, from Saturday night in Los Angeles, but I woke up seriously Sunday morning like slightly depressed because Andrew Luck retired. Like, I couldn't give two flying you-know-whats about the Indianapolis Colts, but there was something like, you know, it's within the scope of football, but tragedy. It was like a tragedy struck the NFL because this is a league that without Andrew Luck is a lesser league, you know,
Yep.
and it'll move on without him and life goes on. But, man, did you see that coming?
I did not. And, you know, I've been following his little phantom mysterious injury all offseason, and I didn't think it would be something to this nature and to this extent. And everything I'm seeing on Twitter from Colts beat writers, it happened fairly recently. It happened fairly quickly. He had a change of heart, and he's still only 29. And when I saw the news come out, Chad, it was like Barry Sanders of this generation. I was a little too young still when Barry Sanders walked away, but now as a full-grown adult, to have a future Hall of Fame quarterback potentially just walk away in the prime of his career, I was blindsided. It's a terrible loss for the game. It's a terrible loss for the Colts fans, obviously. And, you know, Jacoby Brissett does not inspire that same confidence. I liked Andrew Luck as a player a lot, but he was in pain and he suffered a lot, and he's doing what's right for his future and his family. He made a lot of money. He made a lot of plays, and I respect him for holding true to his guns and making this decision. It was not easy, and he held true with it.
Yeah, listening to the trio of Jim Irsay, Chris Ballard, and Frank Reich at their respective podium on Saturday, trying to kind of parse through the timeline and how they helped or how they came to this conclusion. You know, it wasn't like they were trying to persuade Luck to retire by any means. They were trying to be supportive while in their own ways, you know, still trying to subtly urge him to fight through this and continue on because, I mean, he is that franchise. They can sit here and talk about how great of a leader Jacoby Brissett is, and that, you know, they're excited and stoked about their team, and they do have a significantly improved team. I mean, Chris Ballard has made some strides over the failed Ryan Grigson, no doubt about it, but this is not a contender without Andrew Luck. Until proven otherwise, I mean, we've seen Jacoby Brissett before when Luck's been banged up in years past since he was traded there from New England, and you know, they're just not the same team without Andrew Luck. And Luck is one of the truly elite quarterbacks in the NFL today. And it just sucks, dude. He's a goofy guy and all that, but like, you know, he's the guy that would take a shot and then before he's even up and off the grass, he's congratulating his opponent on, hey, nice shot, buddy. Hey, ooh, big hit, big guy.
Yep.
You know, like that joy, that utter just straight up joy for the game and the pleasure of playing football. You know, that was the type of thing that while he was playing, you envisioned that as being part of some Hall of Fame story. You know, but alas, he's not going to make that. He's not going to be there. He's 29 years old. He's really played in 5 NFL seasons since entering the league as the number 1 overall pick in 2012. Been to 4 Pro Bowls, and he's been banged up to, I mean, unbelievably banged up, especially the last 4 or 5 years. So he's definitely not going to go into the Hall of Fame, Zach, unless, who knows, a year from now maybe he unretires, a la Brett Favre.
No, he's not a Hall of Famer now, but his career had that trajectory, Chad. And if he played consistently and if he just stayed healthy, if the injury bug stayed away, I believe he would have been in Canton. It's just it's crazy when you think about the Colts went from having a top 10 quarterback situation, maybe even you could say top 5, top 8, to being in the bottom 3 now with Brissett in the blink of an eye. And the Broncos experienced that when Manning retired. Then you had Trevor Siemian as a starter. Football is crazy. The sport is crazy. Things change. But for one, I did not see this one coming. It's really unfortunate. I do give Luck a lot of credit for sticking to his guns.
We'll see whether or not the Broncos end up being the dark horse that everyone's hoping that they can be this year and shake up the power structure in the AFC. But aside from Patrick Mahomes, who no one in Denver wants to see succeed if the Broncos come up short, like it was Luck and the Colts that were the only other viable check to the dominance of the New England Patriots once again. And who knows? Again, maybe the Broncos can be that team. You know, we've seen Joe Flacco beat the New England Patriots. We've seen Joe Flacco beat the Patriots in their own house in the playoffs. So if everything comes together for the Broncos, you know, that's great. But losing Andrew Luck as a part of the AFC, you know, big picture just gives Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs unfettered access to another AFC championship game, which probably, let's face it, is going to be against the Patriots either at Arrowhead or Gillette.
Yeah, you're right, Chad. It's true that they've not really a contender anymore in Indianapolis, and you take away that franchise quarterback, and they're left with a middling roster, not a great group of skill players, an overwhelmingly great group, not a great defense, good offensive line, but Brissett is just not the same passer. He's not the same talent as Andrew Luck, who is a once-in-a-generation type prospect. Yeah, you could easily say as of now it's going to be Chiefs and the Patriots running through the AFC, and what can you do? You have to knock them off the throne, and all we can hope for is Denver rises to the challenge.
Well, we're going to dive in. We got to react, of course, to what we witnessed in L.A. with your Denver Broncos in the 4th preseason game. But first, a couple of quick matters of business, you guys, especially for our new listeners. Make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. That's how you stay up to date. That's how you keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the show in real time. That's where our announcements come. That's where you can get in on mailbags, the whole 9 yards. Also, if you are on YouTube, keep doing what you guys are doing. Like, comment, share these videos out, these podcast episodes. But still, I tell the about 30 or so % of people who are listening to this podcast every single day on YouTube that aren't subscribing, click the subscribe button. Help us out, okay? And if you're on iTunes, we have something cooking for you guys. For the month of August, we've got a few entries on Apple Podcasts for reviews. We're giving away some swag. It'll be September 1st. We'll announce the winner. For a randomly chosen, we're not going to do it based on the review we like the best. It's going to be a randomly chosen name who has entered a review on the Huddle Up Podcast on Apple Podcasts. So if you haven't done that, check it out. Enter a review for us. Give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. And then you could get some Mile High Huddle / Huddle Up Podcast swag sent to you September 1st. Fantasy football fans, you got to listen up. Do you want to join the biggest NFL season-long tournament ever? Of course you do. If you love fantasy football, and we know you do, then you need to enter the $3.5 million Best Ball Championship on Draft. That's right, $3.5 million in real money. It is absolutely enormous. It's huge. It's season long, but there's no management. You just set it, you forget it. So instead of agonizing over your lineup every single Sunday, Draft does the analysis for you, gives you the most efficient, best odds to win your matchup lineup week in and week out. You do a draft, 16 weeks later, you could be a millionaire. Literally. It does not get any easier than that. It's the highest rated fantasy app, and it's available on the App Store and Google Play, or you can just go online to draft.com. For a limited time only, you can get a free entry into the Best Ball Championship when you make your first deposit. But you have to use our promo code HUDDLE. That's right, a free shot at $1 million just by using our promo code HUDDLE when you make your first deposit on Draft. Also, a phenomenal way to support the Huddle Up podcast. Just search Draft in the App Store or go to draft.com and come play free with promo code HUDDLE.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, Zach, let's dive in here. So the Denver Broncos, they're looking for some kind of clarity on the backup quarterback position. And obviously, it's a short-term position because it's going to go to Drew Lock once he heals up from that sprained thumb. And right now, you got to put Kevin Hogan as the leaderboard, even going into that Rams game. Kevin Hogan was on the leaderboard for that job. And, when Brett Rippon first took the field at the bottom of the second quarter to run that 2-minute drill, it looked like he was going to have some juice and maybe bring something to the table that Hogan had, heretofore been unable to do. Started out hot with five completions in a row, but then it went all downhill from there for Brett Rippon. What was your thoughts first, though, on what you saw from Kevin Hogan on Saturday night?
Well, what I saw from Kevin Hogan was the same thing I saw the last 3 games, Chad. He's just an uninspiring passer. He doesn't do anything overly good. He kind of just flails around in the pocket. He misses some open reads. He's just not a very gifted quarterback. I'm not putting him down personally, but he's just not my cup of tea in the NFL. When Ripon came into the game, the offense seemed to move the ball a little better, but quickly that inexperience and that lack of activity of playing it and getting those live reps, you saw it in his face. You saw him grow up in a sense. You saw him take some lumps, but that's going to happen. I was just satisfied that he got some playing time. Finally, Brett Ripon, that the coaching staff is doing the best thing for the future and not wasting more time on Kevin Hogan even after 2 more quarters. I did think it was kind of odd, though, that they put Ripon in at the very end of the first half. They threw him into like a no-huddle 2-minute drill situation, and he handled himself pretty well. You mentioned the completions. The offense seemed to have a little more juice with him than Kevin Hogan, but it's negligible. These passers don't have the same arm talent as Joe Flacco and even Drew Lock. So you go from having those 2 passers not playing to having these talents in the game. It's a huge drop-off.
I mean, look at it like this. And I'm sure part of it is the design aspect, but let me show you a comparison here. So the Denver Broncos quarterbacks attempted, Ripon and Hogan, a total of 35 passes, and they had 149 pass yards. That doesn't count sacks, okay, between the 2 of them. Brandon Allen and Wolford on the other side of the field for the Rams, let's see, they did 32 or 31 total attempts and had 220 passing yards. I mean, they blew, it's not a lot, granted, right, in 4 quarters of football, but for backups, it just goes to show you that, and Allen's numbers were inflated because of that 51-yard completion on LA's first possession, but you could see the Rams trying to push the ball a little bit and trying to make a play. When Hogan was in the game, that component to the Broncos offense, because there's always an opportunity on every pass play for a deep ball, unless you're just calling 4 curls or whatever. Most plays are designed to have that one outlet that gives the quarterback, depending on how the coverage is and how it shakes out, an opportunity to take a shot. Hogan is yet to really take one of those. Ripon, he had 2 opportunities. More than 2 opportunities, but he took 2 shots. And that's one thing I liked compared to Hogan is Ripon was trying to push the ball down the field. He was showing a little bit more of a spark in that realm. On his first possession at the end of that second quarter, he took a shot at Juwan Winfrey, who was wide open, by the way. That should have been a touchdown. But he overthrew him, didn't even give him a chance to get the ball. And then in the third quarter, there was that deep shot, I think it was to Fred Brown, that he overshot. He overthrew. Mm-hmm. And we just haven't even seen Hogan take a chance. It's like he's playing not to lose, and he's missing wide-open players. He's wide-open receivers, which not in terms of accuracy, like throwing wide. We've seen accuracy issues from him this summer, but I mean in the game in the Rams, like he was missing in his reads wide-open players, which tells me he's not seeing the field. And that is the implications of that for a player that's 4 years into his NFL career. I mean, it tells you everything you need to know. That's why the upside factor, Ripon has it by leaps and bounds at this point. Like Hogan butted up against his ceiling as a pro about 1.5 years ago, and he just hasn't been able to break through it. And so there's some options. There's some opportunity for a higher ceiling with Ripon. I think he even showed that, as inconsistent as he was Saturday night, Zach. Ripon showed that he has some upside potential there. However, if the Broncos are looking at this from a perspective of, we need the surest fail-safe in case someone's pressed into action in that first quarter of the season, something happens to Flacco, the quarterback that can not screw it up, they're probably going to talk themselves into Kevin Hogan. Brett Ripon, he showed some rookie bad decision-making at times on Saturday night, threw that pick, threw a couple of ill-advised throws, ran into some pressures a couple times. But the thing we have to remember, Zach, is he's been the 4th quarterback on the depth chart all summer long. That means he's getting clean-up reps, okay? He's been little more than a glorified camp arm up to this point. So, of course, we're going to see him not look quite as polished. But Saturday night was a little bit of a reality check. I have to admit I got a little bit out over my skis in terms of Ripon. You guys heard me on the podcast talk about it a couple times, that, there's the distinct possibility that today he is a better option as a backup than Kevin Hogan for the Denver Broncos. And while I'm not saying that's untrue necessarily, I have to pump the brakes a little bit on Ripon being the surefire better option today to be a fail-safe backup than Kevin Hogan.
Chad, all the things you laid out out about Kevin Hogan. That's why he's a journeyman. That's why the Browns dumped him. That's why the Redskins dumped him. I mean, 2 quarterback desperate teams for years got rid of him. What does that say? And he, like you said, maxed out his potential. We know what we have in Kevin Hogan. We do not know yet what we have in Brett Rippon. So those reps should go to him. And all the mistakes that he was making, like I mentioned before, were a byproduct of not seeing the field much all preseason, being hidden in training camp, and losing those reps to someone in Kevin Hogan who's probably going to be cut once Drew Lock is healthy. At least I should hope so. We also have to factor in that Rippon and Kevin Hogan both, they were, and especially Rippon though, they work with terrible offensive lines. So not only did he have the processing of the game and having those jitters and having that big time experience and that opportunity, he was working behind an offensive line that was constantly getting him hit. And to his credit, Chad, he was limping around a few times, Rippon. He was beat up. He took a beating in that game, and he still kept on and tried to lead the Broncos back in that game. It didn't work out. But I still want to see way more of him. Even though he overthrew Fred Brown, which should have been a touchdown, that's the throw he has to make. And I was surprised someone like Rippon can actually overthrow him. But once he gets that down, we're, like you said, we're already seeing the element to his game. We're already seeing that he has the smarts and the headiness to take those shots downfield, whereas Hogan plays East and West football. It's not inspiring, even as a backup. I want to see the Broncos groom their backup quarterback of the future, and that's not Kevin Hogan. That's Brett Rippon. So I hope he is the last quarterback we see, Rippon, until Oakland. Yeah. Getting Kevin Hogan out there, regardless of the position, the quarter, the game, it's just wasted opportunity. And now you can't risk him at all because of injury. But what we've seen is what we're going to see. And you can't say the same thing about Rippon, though. He's going to grow and he's going to ascend and he's going to develop. But I think Hogan already maxed that out. So they're just wasting their time dragging this process out.
But if those conversations, just to play devil's advocate, because you and I pretty much share a brain on this, but just to play devil's advocate, the conversations that are going to be taking place in those rooms at Dove Valley are going to be about mitigating risk while also balancing what's best for this franchise long term.
Right.
So
absolutely.
what it really comes down to for them is what takes priority, mitigating risk, meaning the guy that they could probably count on the most to fill in if something goes sideways with Flacco in the first quarter of the season, or is the upside long-term potential and what's best for the team in the grand scheme of things going to take precedence? From what we've seen, I think in recent history, from John Elway's decision-making, we'll see how much Vic Fangio can alter this equation, but what we've seen mostly from Elway is protecting the asset today, not so much looking in the future. The only thing from the quarterback position that really runs counter to that was what Elway chose to do in 2015, not risking Trevor Siemian to the waiver wire, carrying him as a seventh-round rookie on the 53 behind Peyton Manning and Brock Osweiler, despite there really never being a reason for him to be on the roster because he didn't want to risk him. He saw long-term potential possibly as a backup, and he eventually became a starter, of course, in Denver. But at the time, he was envisioned as perhaps a long-term viable backup to who was going to be the next guy, Brock Osweiler. And so if they take a similar mindset this year, the only thing that throws a wrench into that same equation of just taking what happened in 2015 and doing it again in 2019 is the Brock Osweiler in that 2015 equation is injured in this equation. Drew Lock is hurt. So now they have to factor in other things like, if this thing goes off the rails, Joe Flacco goes down in the second quarter of week 1 or week 2 or week 3 and Lock's still nursing that thumb, which quarterback do we feel like can at least mitigate risk and not give a game away?
No, you're right, and Elway will and should protect and do what's in the best interest of the team. And Lock's injury just complicated things, though. It's unfortunate because you had your top 3 pretty much set. You had your veteran, stable presence in Joe Flacco, who you're all in on. You have your second-round gunslinging rookie, who you moved up for and you're excited about, and then you have your developmental guy, your long-term upside backup, your Chase Daniel, so to speak, your Trevor Siemian and Brett Rippon. That's a really good setup and a huge upgrade on what we've seen. But Lock's injury just complicates matters. And how do you form the 53? Do you put Lock on IR after final cuts are announced? Do you carry 3? Do you carry 2? If they just, if they had it their way, if they had their druthers of all stars aligned, you would have your top 3 and Kevin Hogan would not be on the roster. So it does complicate things, and unfortunately Lock's injury will probably mean that Hogan makes the 53 at least for half the season. But I'm just saying that any opportunity that they give him over Brett Rippon right now, or Drew Lock when he was healthy, is just wasted. It's just hindering the future, and it's not doing anything to help the team in the long run.
Here's one last thing I want to say regarding why I think ultimately they're going to go with Hogan over Rippon is because, before this game, I was thinking to myself, and we talked about it on the podcast, that, the Broncos have been sandbagging Rippon, not wanting to expose him to the NFL film and trying in that vein to sneak him onto the practice squad, put him on waivers at the final cutdowns, and then re-sign him to the practice squad, and that they don't want to risk him. Well, he didn't do anything on Saturday night that is really going to jeopardize the Broncos waiving him and getting him on the practice squad. I mean, he just didn't do enough for any team, I don't think, out there to be like, oh, crap, we got to – because if you claim a player on waivers, you got to put him on the 53. So I don't think there was anything he showed Saturday night, and in that half of a fourth quarter he played in the Hall of Fame game up to this point. Now we still got one more game to go, so this equation can be altered. I just don't think he's shown enough that one of the other 31 teams out there is going to go, ooh, yeah, they just put Rippon on the wire? Yeah, let's claim him, put him on the 53. Could be wrong. All it takes is one team to fall in love or like a guy to make that a reality, but that's why my gut today, like if I had to make a bold prediction, not a bold prediction, but a prediction on what the Broncos end up doing, I don't think they're going to put Drew Lock on injured reserve because they don't want the lack of flexibility in terms of they don't get him back for 8 full weeks. Like there's no getting around that. Plus, there's limitations in terms of how much he can participate with team meetings and out on the field and all that stuff when you're on injured reserve. And I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're just going to keep him on the 53. They're going to waive Brett Rippon. They're probably going to re-sign him to the practice squad. Not probably, they will. And they're going to roll with the healthy Joe Flacco and a healthy Kevin Hogan for the first quarter of this season.
Chad, I'm right there with you. And, my brain tells me one thing, my heart tells another. I want to see more Rippon, but not only did he not do enough last night to make his case to have to be on the roster, he also didn't do enough to unseat Hogan. That was his opportunity right then. If he had a 3-touchdown game, then you could make the conversation. But obviously the Broncos decision makers, they have some sort of confidence in Hogan and they lean on his experience behind Joe Flacco. And you know what? Rightfully so. You have 2 other rookie quarterbacks and one of them is injured right now. It sucks, but that's part of the game and you got to roll with it. I am in full agreement with you, though, Chad, on what they're going to do. I just say if they cut Brett Rippon, though, there's no guarantee, let's say, it's not 100% that another team wouldn't swoop in there, just like Kyle Sloter, and try to pluck Rippon away.
All right, well, there's still some other elements to this game we got to break down. Who jumped out to us and any other takeaways from the 4th preseason game. We're going to get to that here in just a second. First, a quick break. We'll be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, Zach, let's touch on what else jumped out to us on Saturday night. It was another snooze fest. I mean, I keep telling fans, don't get so worried about this offense. Rich Scangarello, he's you can't make any overarching conclusions on what this offense is going to look like under Rich Scangarello based on how a Kevin Hogan or based on how a Brett Rippon is operating this thing. And even Joe Flacco, because they're not game planning for their opponent. They're going out there, they're calling plays. You talk a lot about it, Zach, that they're not trying to show their hand in terms of putting anything real on film that could give an opponent an advantage in the regular season. So it's the epitome of vanilla. We can't draw any overarching conclusions, but man, how many touchdowns has this team scored in 4 preseason games? 2, I think. Am I wrong? Because there was the Juwan Winfrey touchdown in the opener that won the game. Oh, no, 3. There was Khalfani Muhammad scored in that game as well. And then Drew Lock's touchdown to Devontae Jackson. So unless I'm wrong, this team has only scored 3 touchdowns under Rich Scangarello through 4 full preseason games. Does that concern you?
I never really thought of it that way, and I think you're right. And it's kind of I wouldn't say alarming, but it jumps out to you. And that game last night, Chad, was difficult to watch, and it's difficult to talk about the next day, and it's difficult to go back in the film and rewatch. I still would not press the panic button on the offense just yet. Based on what we've seen from the starters and Flacco and the skill positions, and not even the full offensive line yet, not even the full team has debuted yet, there's encouraging signs. So I'm not pressing the panic button, but you still want to see more offensive consistency and success, especially in the red zone. And even Flacco failed there. So we have to hope that they get the kinks ironed out and start to get in the ball in the end zone, because they're going to be in for some shootouts this season, and they can't just rely solely on their defense again. That's what tricked them up the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think ultimately we gotta put a pin in this whole thing with the offense, because we just have to wait till we see how Rich Scangarello actually crafts a game plan, how the first teamers execute that game plan against real outside competition that are also game planning for them, and just give it some time. It's not the greatest start in terms of getting everyone excited about what Rich Scangarello brings, but that's just from watching terrible football by fair to middling quarterbacks up to this point, for the most part, in the preseason, going against, with second, third, and fourth team players going against the same level of competition. We got to wait. We got to pump the brakes, because, if you listen to what the players are saying about Rich Scangarello, I mean, they are geeked up. They have nothing but good to say about Rich Scangarello from a teaching perspective, from a design perspective, X's and O's. So I think it's just at this point we got to wait. Now, who jumped out to you from whether on the offense or defensive side of the ball as, stud level performances against the Rams?
I mean, no one really on offense I wouldn't say was a stud. Muhammad had that nice spin move, but my standouts were mostly on defense, the few that they were. Justin Hollins, at inside linebacker, who played some edge last night too. He led the team with 8 tackles. He had a big stop on the 4th and 1 against the Rams. He played all 69 defensive snaps, according to Mike Liss. And that's a phenomenal step in the right direction for Hollins, who's kind of struggled at the off-ball position. But he was just reading and reacting last night, Chad. He was exploding to the ball carrier who was wrapping up. He played with instinct and he played with aggression. And he was definitely, I think, a top 2 standout. Another guy on the defensive side was Mike Purcell, the defensive lineman, who looked a lot like Domata Peko out there with the hair, and he was penetrating in the backfield. I think based on last night, he has a legit opportunity to leapfrog Zach Kerr as the main rotational defensive lineman for this team. Based on just what we've seen him play and based on the way he's progressed in the system under Fangio, I think he's taken more of a leap than Kerr, and I think he offers more than Kerr, a little bit of a pass rusher too, not just a pure run stopper.
Yeah. That tells you a lot how the coaches view Justin Hollins, that he literally played all 69 snaps. And I don't think it's because, for example, they're preserving all the players that they think they're going to count on, in the regular season. None of those guys really saw any snaps, with a few exceptions like Will Parks and probably Sua Cravens and Alexander Johnson. But I think in the case of Justin Hollins, those 69 reps and playing 100% of defensive snaps, the more appropriate way to interpret that is not that let's just throw him to the meat grinder because he's not going to be a factor in the regular season, but rather let's get him as many quality live bullet reps as we possibly can. He's still learning 2 new positions, and see whether he sinks or swims. And in this game, this is the first time I could really say that he swam. He got it done. And as you said, he made that great play on 4th down to turn the ball over basically to the Broncos. He as an off-ball linebacker, he's shown me more, honestly, as much as he struggled throughout the preseason. He's shown me more, and I think he showed more Saturday night, as an off-ball backer than he did as an outside linebacker. And even Vic Fangio, after the game, said, when he was asked about pass rush, he said, during the game, as I'm on the sideline, I haven't watched the film, obviously, but during the game, it really didn't feel like we were doing much to pressure the quarterback. So, and I think that's true about Hollins. Like when he did play edge and he was tasked with rushing the passer, you just didn't see anything. There was no Malik Reed action on Saturday night. So the Broncos, from a pressure perspective, with the few exceptions of interior guys like Mike Purcell, a couple of times from Draymond Jones and DeMarcus Walker, there was just zero pressure on those Rams quarterbacks, which is why, when you look at the box score from an efficiency perspective, it appears the Rams throwers were way better than the Broncos, and they were, let's face it. But there was one of the reasons why is they just weren't getting any pressure on him.
That's a good shout on Walker, though, who continues to make plays in this defense, Chad. And he's kind of, proving us correct, and we've stood by him. And I think he's going to be an integral part of this defense, at least as a reserve player. But I'm right there with you on Hollins, too. He struggled mightily, I would say, the first 3 games at off-ball, and he really grew up last night. It was like watching a different player. I don't know if it was the competition or what kicked in, but I was of the opinion he should have stayed primarily at OLB. But after last night, I think he has a shot now to unseat Alexander Johnson, who performed better than him the last couple games. But he really stood out to me. He really jumped out, Hollins, and he has a case now to be perhaps the top reserve inside linebacker.
One other thing I want to mention as far as players that stood out in any way was we finally saw Keyshawn Bierria make a play. And it was a single play on that 4th down attempt by the Rams where he ran that tight end out of bounds at the 1 who was trying to extend for the pylon. The Rams had gone for it on the on the 3-yard line or 2, whatever it was. And the completion to the tight end, he's trying to make it to the corner, to the pylon, and Bierria just out-hustled him. He wanted it more, and he's prevented him from crossing the plane, and the Broncos got the ball back again. And so it was good to finally see one positive mark for Keyshawn Bierria. He even got a little bit of a shout-out from Vic Fangio after the game, but only because it was mentioned by the media. The media said, what did you think about the play Keyshawn Bierria had? Fangio said, quote, yeah, it was a good play. We were in man coverage. He covered his man well enough to stop him from getting 2 yards. I guess it was from the 2-yard line, close quote. So, it's about as close to a compliment as you can get, I guess, from Vic Fangio.
It's kind of some subtle shade there. And let me just add one point about Bierria, though, not to just counter what you said. On the play before that 4th down, Brandon Allen missed a wide open running back on the goal line. I think it was John Allen, I don't know the running back's name. John Kelly, the Rams running back,
Kelly
he's
from
wide open. Yeah, and Bierria fell down. I believe it was Bierria on the goal line. So, I mean, he's still inconsistent, but that quote from Vic Fangio is an all-timer. He can cover 2 yards. That's good to know.
Oh, man. Fangio's just got to be so, at this point, over the preseason. I mean, think about this. We are at a point where in most years, we're no longer talking about preseason. We are officially now with 4 preseason games under the belt, focusing on final cutdowns on this conversation. We're focusing on week 1, but we still got one more freaking preseason game to stomach, and it's going to come against the Arizona Cardinals on Thursday night. We're probably not going to see any Kyler Murray, so don't get your hopes up. It's just going to be another snoozer.
Hey, we get to see Vance in action, though, or at least his defense try to stop the Broncos. I mean, they gave up a game-winning touchdown to Kyle Sloter against the, I don't know if you saw the highlight, Chad, the other day. And in Vance's defense, they missed 2 tackles in the last play of the game. It was just his defense coming up unclutch as usual. But it'd be nice, I guess, to go up against finally wrap up this preseason and their annual meeting against the Cardinals. But to see Vance again on the other sideline, that's going to be kind of surreal.
One last thing, this has nothing to do with the game, but I wanted to get your take. Your take on this. Buzz came out Saturday morning. It's not been corroborated. The Dolphins via the Miami Herald have denied this, but Buzz came out that the Dolphins were putting their left tackle, Laremy Tunsil, on the trade block. And we'd heard buzz on our end that possibly the Broncos were interested in him because obviously they could use an upgrade at left tackle. Juwan James is obviously familiar with playing with Laremy Tunsil. And then, of course, Chris Cooper, the new assistant line coach, was an assistant O-line coach in Miami for the last 2-3 years before he came to Denver. So there are some dots there to be connected. It sounds like in a theoretical world the Broncos would be interested in him. But the question would be cost, not just in terms of the capital it would take to get Tunsil in Denver, which sounds like a bare minimum would be a first and a third, but also the salary cap ramifications, because in 2019, he's going to cost somewhere around $4 million on the cap, and in 2020s, that goes up to like $10 million and change. The Broncos could get creative probably and find a way to fit him under the cap this year. But would you, if this turns out to, if this is true, if there's any, if it's genuine that the Dolphins are at least testing the waters on what the market would look like for Tunsil, is this a no-brainer? Is this something the Broncos should pursue with a vengeance, with gusto, or is it still too early to give up on Garrett Bowles?
Well, I know Tunsil, Mr. Gas Mask would love Denver, and I know Denver would probably love Tunsil. I wouldn't say it's a no-brainer, Chad. It's just not feasible. You've invested in First and Bowles a couple of years ago. You just splurged on Juwan James. You kind of have to let your investments play out a little more before you start bringing in more players and hampering the salary cap. He would no doubt be a massive upgrade on Garrett Bowles, and he would no doubt solidify this offensive line. But you just can't do it right now. And nor I think the Dolphins will trade him. And if they do, they're going to get kind of a ransom. And the Broncos just aren't in that position right now after their capital and their investments to make the transaction right now. I would love it, but we're not playing Madden. And if we were, it'd be a no-brainer. But now it's just, unfortunately, it's not feasible.
Well, and there were conflicting reports from the Miami Herald, and that is that the Dolphins are open for business in terms of, they're rebuilding. So the assets they have on the personnel level, they're basically at a make us an offer type of situation right now. Like they're openly encouraging calls, but with regard to the specific situation of Tunsil, they remain adamant that, at least on a public level, they are not shopping their franchise left tackle. And, when he came into the league, there were questions, obviously, about, as you hinted at there, his issues with weed, possibly off-field stuff. But none of that has actually cropped up or come to any kind of fruition or hurt him at all at the next level. He has arguably already established himself as a top 10 left tackle in this league. He's still extremely young. So if you're the Denver Broncos and you're basically going into this season with, this is our last hurrah with Garrett Bowles, and if he doesn't hit it out of the park, we're going to go with an offensive tackle in round 1 next year, which is what we're hearing. Then you're going to earmark that first round pick on a tackle anyway next year. Why not trade it to a team like the Miami Dolphins for a surefire guy who can step right in out of the gates and upgrade the position? Maybe you send Bowles to them as part of the deal, free up cap to fit him under the cap this year. I don't know for sure, but for the privilege, not only are you giving up that first rounder, you're at least giving up a third as well, which, the Broncos did get an extra third-round pick this coming draft because of the trade back from pick 10. So there's some options there. It's just a matter of how motivated and what the Dolphins are and what kind of market and demand is actually there in terms of how much their phones are ringing and what kind of other offers are out there.
I mean, here's why it makes no sense for the Dolphins, though. Yeah, they're rebuilding. Yeah, they have a defensive-minded head coach, but you just traded for Josh Rosen, and even if he's not your franchise quarterback, you're probably going to draft one next year, and you have your franchise left tackle already in place. Why would you give up that asset? Why would you take that away? That's the second toughest position to find behind a franchise quarterback, and you potentially have both those already in place. So it's that time of year where these narratives get written and trades look to be made. Same thing with Clowney, and there's been no movement on that. Same thing with, we've heard the holdouts, all the rumors, Melvin Gordon, Ezekiel Elliott. Things are going to get resolved, and ultimately, I don't see Tunsil going anywhere. And if he does, he's not coming to Denver.
All right, well, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Huddle Up Podcast, the gut reaction for the Rams game. Now, listen, our schedule is going to be a little bit different this week because the Broncos are playing on Thursday night. So here's how it's going to shake out. This podcast, we're publishing it on Sunday for you guys, so you have something to listen to as close to the actual game we're reacting to as possible. But it's also going to count for Monday. So it'll have to tide you over till Zach and I return on Tuesday with a fresh podcast. You'll get the Scout's Eye preview on Wednesday. Zach and I will have another podcast for you to wake up to Thursday morning, which will be game day. And then we'll have the VIP mailbag / gut reaction in one episode for you on Friday. Roster cuts, the final cuts come the next day, which is Saturday. Building the Broncos, I'm sure we'll have something cooking for you that day. But we're probably going to get together, Zach and I, Saturday evening to record a gut reaction to the final roster cuts. When that'll publish, I'm not sure. It'll either be Wednesday or Monday that following week. But just to give you kind of a heads up on how this coming week's programming is going to unfold on the Huddle Up podcast. And then also, we have a new podcast debuting with Eric Trickle and Lance Sanderson. I forgot to tell you about this, Zach, that's coming out. They're calling it the Dove Valley Deep Divers. That's going to complement what we're doing here with Huddle Up Podcast, Building the Broncos. We've been podcasting and giving you 6 pods a week for the last 8 months. And now you're going to get 7 pods, basically. You're going to get 1 pod for every single day of the week, which no one else is doing. We got some competition out there, Zach, in the daily podcast realm. But when you hear daily, what that means is, 5 days a week if you're lucky, right? But you're going to get 7 podcasts a week moving forward from us. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, make sure you're following the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. You can find my partner, Zack Kelberman, on Twitter at Kelberman NFL, myself at Chad and Jensen. By the way, Zach, have you gotten any people reaching out to you about this fantasy league we spitballed?
I've gotten a lot, actually, more than I've wanted, of DMs and people reaching out. I only say that because we haven't really finalized how big the league's going to be yet. We're still working through the logistics. But, yeah, a lot of Broncos fans, a lot of listeners, to their credit, have come out and DM me about it. I will reach out to everyone once we figure out what everyone's doing. I want to have a bigger league, Chad, and we're still figuring out the draft type, whether it's an auction draft. But I've gotten everyone's requests. I've got you down. Just let me work through it, and I will reach out to everybody.
Okay, you heard it there, everybody. And in the meantime, don't forget, if you haven't left a review on Apple Podcasts, go take some time and get that done while it's still the month of August, because we're giving away some swag We're going to pull a name out of a hat, basically, for whoever left a review in the month of August to give away some Mile High Huddle / Huddle Up podcast swag on September 1st. So go get that done. For Zack Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. We'll talk to you on Tuesday.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.